Alright, anybody who's here, I think I finally have all my technical issues worked out. If somebody stops by, let me know how the audio is for me. That would be greatly appreciated. So glad you guys could join me tonight. Little different studio setup than what I'm used to. I'm kind of loafing around on the couch today, but it's been too much that was very important not to pop on here and really talk about it. Just want to grab my tabs here, make sure I'm all set up to go, and my notes, and I think I'm ready to roll. If you're out there in the chat, thank you for joining me tonight live. If you're joining me later on YouTube, I really appreciate you being here. I cannot stress enough the importance of tonight's episode. I think we are at an important moment in history, maybe. And I very much value your time in joining me. So let me fade out the music here, and I just want to say I don't fear the moment we're in. Man, my glasses really need adjusted. I don't fear the moment we're in. I am simply reserved to meet the challenge we're faced with. We are living at a time when we're seemingly the most divided. At that time, I've never been more aware of how connected and important we all are to each other. Our one fundamental truth that binds all of us together is we need each other for survival. Homo sapiens need each other, just like almost every other species on Earth. For our species to thrive and survive, we have to work together. And we might be a lot more complex than bacteria, but even some recent research shows that some bacteria actually have a method of self-identification and some basic social structures. Almost every species on Earth needs their social structures to survive, and we're no different. We have to work together to ensure the security of the Earth's resources and enough of them that we can thrive. When we don't, and conflict arises, and conflict will arise. There will be times when resources are scarce. There will be time when resources are plenty. We simply have two paths out of conflict. Either we choose to have difficult and meaningful conversations, and we promote human cooperation, but the other path is violence. Those are really the only two ways to resolve a conflict. Conversation, violence. So true is the nature of all modern conflict in humanity. We have a choice to make, and this choice is always with us. In each moment, we can choose to solve things with words and a meeting of our minds, or we can use our language and actions to destroy each other. One leads us to a path of harmony and transcendence and peace, and the other one of misery and self-defeat and pain. Constant pain. You might not take a high level of interest in politics, current events, news, philosophy, and I don't judge you for that. But there will come a time when you can no longer not take an interest in it. You will be forced to. For the humble residents of Ukraine, a 40-year peace had lulled them into a slumber regarding the realities of enemies. For the disinterested non-voter on the left, that sat out of the 2016 U.S. election and did not go vote for Hillary Clinton, the current consequence is now the overturning of Roe versus Wade. For those on the right who believe free markets are the answer to all of our economic problems, many of them now live in the poorest and worst conditions in our country in the South and in the Midwest. Resources are becoming more scarce every day, and the conflict rises with that scarcity. I believe so too should the seriousness of our conversation about these problems. And we should leave our sensitivity and our confidence and our righteousness at the door. We all have a part to play. We all need to think about what we might be getting wrong, and how the truths we are choosing to be ignorant to are affecting our fellow human beings. We have a responsibility to the truth, and that includes being skeptical of our own beliefs and holding ourselves accountable to being a better person. To quote the great Sam Harris, we don't get anything we want by pretending to know things that we don't know. You might think that you know what the right answer is on the current news of the day. My goal tonight is to show you why I'm convinced that that's nearly impossible. Of course, we'll get into the details of some of the serious issues that have come up. But first I want to show you what we need to do first. The difficult work of skepticism and critical thinking. It's not just something you learn in school, never to use again. It's a duty. It's a duty we owe ourselves and our fellow human being. I hope you'll take this as seriously as I am and rise to meet this challenge with me and listen in tonight. This may be one of the most important moments in American history, or maybe even the world at large. And a failure to listen to each other and to take these issues seriously will result in that, will result in more conflict and more violence. So, firstly, I want to point out that every major topic we talk about, we do so completely distracted from what's actually important on that issue. Whether it's rights and liberties or climate change, jobs, healthcare, taxes, federal spending, criminal justice reform, foreign policy, war, whatever. We are insanely distracted 24/7. Just a couple of examples from the immediate week of news. Gas prices. If you read almost every news outlet, they're all pretty much repeating so-called oil industry experts and what they're saying, which is, hey, look, inflation, it's inflation, right? Like, it's caused by so many things. Look at all the money we spent during the pandemic and the war with Russia and Ukraine and supply chain and shortages at the refineries. And that's why gas prices had to go up so much. And whether you go to Fox or CNN or any other major news network, that's the story. And the distraction is this. The sleight of hand is this. The 5 major oil companies, Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, the rest, made $35 billion in the first quarter. And profit. That's the story. Is it acceptable, regardless of any of that other stuff, to allow oil companies to profit at that level, $35 billion in 3 months, while most Americans can't afford their life? Is that the kind of country you want to be proud of? Is that the kind of environment you want to live in? That's the real issue. Now, wherever you stand on that, we can talk about that. But to pretend that price gouging isn't part of it, the last time that oil was this price per barrel Gas was only $3.80 a gallon. So why is it $5? Maybe we're getting screwed? Could be an answer. There's a lot of factors, of course, but definitely we're getting screwed. Another example of constantly distracted thinking. Roe versus Wade was overturned. It's a big issue. I am going to be highly critical of my friends on the left here who never want to stop talking about women's rights and the woman's right to choose. And they have made that an anthem. They've made that the core thing to talk about. This is all about a woman's rights. Turns out the debate's not about that at all. It's not. The core disagreement on abortion is about whether or not a fetus is a person. It's philosophical. We spend our time buying into two narratives. One from one side, one from the other. And all Americans, regardless of what side they fall on, are missing the truth that's in the middle. And we can't get that unless we talk to each other. You can't get it by talking to your other friends on the right. You can't get it by talking to your other friends on the left. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. The truth is in the middle. If you ask me, I'm going bald way too fast. If you ask my wife, she loves my head of thinning hair, and it's not so bad. I'm ready to shave it. Every time I look at it on camera, I'm like, get rid of it. Obviously, the reasonable truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The right doesn't want to talk about making a fetus a person because it would make them uncomfortable about a lot of other deeply held beliefs. If a fetus that doesn't even have a nervous system yet and can't feel is granted personhood, then a whole lot of other living organisms meet that criteria, and they themselves are a mass murderer every time they eat a cheeseburger. This is a philosophical thing. It comes down to philosophy, and you can make it about every other issue that you want. But we're really talking about, is this a person? Because I don't think you want to live in a world where it's okay to kill a person just because they're attached to you and living off of your resources. Would it be acceptable for one conjoined twin to kill their sibling? I mean, they're living off part of your body. They can't seem to live without you, right? That's the argument I hear a lot of times on the left. Is it's all about the viability of the fetus and when it could live on its own. I don't think when something can live on their own, I don't think that's a justification that we want to use for ending a person's life. As soon as something can't live on its own, what does that even mean? I just talked about in the beginning of the show, we can't live without each other. I think it's wrong to kill persons, and I don't think a fetus is a person, but that's irrelevant to the point. What I think on this issue is truly irrelevant to the point. The point is how distracted are we? Every second on TV and every news station and conversations with your friends and conversations, like, we are talking about not the core issue, and it's because we don't know how to talk about it. So it's easy to become distracted. It's hard to think about these problems in an actual enlightening way where we're trying to figure out what's truly right, and we're not coming into it with the assumption that I'm already correct based on bad arguments. Because typically the conversation I see online is two people telling each other why they're already right, repeating bad arguments. Free will, how that affects justice. Personhood, and how that affects justice. These are things that are decent and consistent philosophical answers to that have worked for quite some time that are not well adopted. They're not believed by many people. And all the while we spend this time being distracted, these issues become more and more of a real problem facing us right now. Most of the problem that we talk about, and it's the number one voting issue every year, jobs and the economy. The reason why we have a problem with jobs and the economy comes down to your political philosophy. How we know what that should look like and what good would look like for jobs and the economy. And we're not having a conversation about that. We're having a conversation about Democrats and Republicans. What? What are you talking about? The problem with insane profiting of the oil companies while the rest of us suffer have to do with exploitation of labor and whether or not we think we have an obligation to provide the means of survival to other human beings in a society. These are politically philosophical questions. And we have these unresolved philosophical differences, and the political parties, they vaguely hide these things. They don't want you to be talking about that. They want you to be distracted, Republican and Democrat. And the news is also profiting off of these same things. What I'm really talking about, we have an incentive problem that hides us from the truth. You have the profit motive of news and advertising and all of the type of organizations that the government would need to crack down on. And that profit motive is a bad incentive for truth. Because if you knew the truth about private property rights and about some of these things that I've argued about previously on my show, and I won't go into too much detail about that tonight, but if you knew the truth about it, we would challenge the status quo much, much harder. And we also have the incentive problem that comes with just finding out what truth is. That's a difficult and painful process. It requires challenging closely held beliefs and values. There's a right or wrong answer to whether or not a God exists. And the philosophy on that is rather clear. But you're not allowed to talk about politics and religion. Those are the things. Can't talk about it. We can't talk about the things that we actually have real conflict over. When are we going to talk about them? Because things are getting worse for people every single day. It's time to talk about them. And it's time to have those difficult conversations. And maybe learn something. And maybe try to see where I'm wrong. We also have the incentive problem that humanity's social needs bias us towards wanting to get as much recognition and as much fame and as much sensationalization as possible, and not actual impact and finding of truth. It's not as fun. It doesn't make as many friends. You won't have the buzz feeling of saying something that's pretty exciting and everyone flocks to your show. But we have this problem, and it's real. Furthermore, especially in the United States, we have fundamentally mismatched sets of virtues, and they're internally contradictory virtues. And I want to kind of get into that, how that affects our view on news and politics and current events and the issues today. And if you're out there watching on YouTube or, joining me live on Facebook or Twitch, feel free to chat with me. I've got all my chats open. But we're going to get into this, and I think part of the problem, and this is a human habit, we are apes that tell stories. And we tell ourselves the most elaborate stories about what we're feeling and what we're thinking, about what we want, what we don't want, about who our friends are and what happened yesterday. And we just nonstop tell these stories. The problem is most of our stories have a hero-villain arc. We love a hero-villain narrative. And we're becoming divided and taking this step towards violence instead of a better conversation and human cooperation. Because all you have to do is read your social media feed right now, and it probably looks like the person on the other side of the Roe v. Wade fence is the villain, and you think you're the hero. Nope. Doesn't work like that. You are both human beings, equally valued, with a mismatched belief. One that has dire consequences in either direction, no doubt. But there's not a hero and there's not a villain. Even if you're right. If you're pro-life and you're right, you're not a hero. If you're pro-choice and you're right, you're not a hero. And the other person is not a villain. We are all human beings that have to work together for survival to share the Earth's resources and get along. We either choose violence towards each other or human cooperation and conversation. Those are our two choices. So you have to stop seeing the person on the other side as an enemy, as a threat. They can be your friend. They can be somebody you welcome. The problem with hero-villain narratives is whenever there's villains present, we adopt warrior virtues, and it becomes an honor culture very quickly. Those warrior virtues of loyalty to one's tribe, respect. I deserve respect because I'm right and righteous. Being ready to fight readiness, always at the ready, always attentive, ready to defend your virtues. And faith. That's warrior virtues. Faith. They're the virtues that you have to fight. And anytime we can identify a villain, it's like that. We immediately adopt those virtues. We immediately jump in and we're ready to fight. We have loyalty and respect to our culture and our tribe and our beliefs and the unrelenting faith that we are on the right side of history. Genghis Khan had those virtues. The samurai had those virtues. The soldier must adopt those virtues. But I don't think you want to. Most days, when we don't see a villain, when we can identify a villain, when we recognize that some things simply suck, we embrace much more Gandhian virtues. Forgiveness over loyalty, right? You might have wronged me, or my family, or my tribe, but I forgive you. I'm not going to defend them for some unrelenting loyalty. I'm going to choose to forgive instead. And choose love, because an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Love over respect, forgiveness over loyalty, nonviolence over fight readiness, and arguably most importantly, reason over faith. And when we choose reason over faith, we can actually make sense of the world around us. Sometimes the answers aren't fun. The reason game is painful at times. Now more than ever, I think, Americans are ready to fight each other. We believe the people on the other side of these issues that have different values than us, we think they're our enemy. Rather than seeing them as someone who may just be confused. And maybe considering if we're the ones that are confused. We aren't interested in truth. We want to fight for what we already believe to be the truth. That is the difference. And all this other nonsense is a distraction to keep getting you to tell yourself that hero-villain story. The other guy's a villain, and you're the hero. Don't you know? It says it right here in Fox. The other guy's a villain, and you're the hero. Don't you know? They said it on CNN. The other guy's a villain, and you're the hero. Don't you know? Your favorite YouTuber said it. Or celebrity. Or politician. Or family member that you value. We want to be the hero. And we're pretty sure the other guy's a villain. And you're both just human. Capable of being wrong. That's the one thing we all have in common. Is how much we're wrong all the time. I'm very serious and somber tonight because there's a very real threat of civil war in our future. And if you're unaware of some of the politics or the history, this next bit requires a little bit of context. But the Texas Republican Party voted for a new platform that includes a potential vote on seceding from the Union. And it's not serious. It won't hold up. It's not even... I mean, it's kind of funny when you even say that out loud. Like, oh, Texas is going to leave the United States. The point is enough people want to. We're truly living at a time when we're like, we don't even want to be in the same country as you people anymore because we disagree that much. And a lot of people might say, well, that's a good thing. Maybe they should be their own country. And I point out, how does that work out around the world? Nations themselves are a source of tribal loyalty. Need I remind you that there's a war being fought in a country where people pretty much look the same, speak damn near the same language, and have most of the same family heritage? Over what? Over what? I might also remind you that both sides of that fight vehemently believe that they're right. Vehemently believe that the other guy's the villain and that they're the hero. That's what a hero-villain story is. It is a resort to violence rather than cooperation and conversation. Do you want Washington, D.C. to become Kyiv? Or do you want to talk about the difficult things and be the example to the rest of the world about how human conversation and cooperation can solve anything if only we are willing to listen to each other? Earnestly, in good faith, trust that the other person has our mutual interests in mind, the goal of human survival and cooperation, and find a way to make it work. That's what's at stake in the world right now. And in our own country, we could go the other direction and end up in civil war very quickly. Secession from the Union was the final fuse that lit the fires of civil war the last time. And now, in the past couple of years, we've had major challenges to our democracy. The January 6th riot. Trump continues the lie that he won the election. And polling in the GOP continues to show that GOP voters think it was actually, at least in part, some shenanigans went down. 2/3 of them think that the election was not free and fair. 2/3 of Republicans. Almost a quarter of Republicans approved of the January 6th riot. that overtook the Capitol and threatened the life of senators and cost the life of people. Political unrest was last this high just before the first Civil War. This is something social media executives are worried about. They're worried about their own creations and how they're causing it. And the funny thing is they don't want to admit the truth. They're just as much of a part of the thing constantly distracting us from what's really important. If anything, they're the most guilty. And some of them are afraid of their own creations. They know they have caused wars. Whenever state power starts to overwhelm individual liberty, that pushes us towards war. We are just seeing the beginning of the potential changes from how conservative the Supreme Court is. Roe v. Wade won't stop at Roe v. Wade. I saw a great point on Kyle Kulinski's show Secular Talk that by the logic they used in discussing potentially overturning the ruling that allows same-sex marriage, technically it's the same argument that would overturn interracial marriage. They say it's not protected by the Constitution. And if it's not protected by the Constitution, well, then what's to stop any state from passing a law saying you can't marry interracially? Now, do I think that would happen in 2022? No, I think it's too politically unsavory. But that's the only reason. It's not because it would be the right thing to do or that our laws are actually protecting us. The Constitution clearly doesn't protect us. It certainly hasn't led to a free and fair democracy where the will of the people is recognized, because Roe versus Wade being overturned represents a clear strike against the will of the people. The overwhelming majority of people support pro-choice. In the United States. And you can make it about states' rights if you want, but once again, do you really want to go down that road? These are difficult chats. These are difficult conversations. States' rights. Okay, what's to say Alabama was like, you know what? No more interracial marriage. See ya, Dunskies. The people that would want to do that still wouldn't be a villain. They might just be confused about what's important. Maybe their strength is they're paying attention and you weren't. Maybe that's part of why Donald Trump was elected in 2016 and why we got 3 Supreme Court justices. Not enough people were paying attention to what's going on around them. And that's by design. Once again, back to the incentive problem. If you look at how much money there is in politics, 9 out of 10 of the provisions of the Build Back Better bill that was proposed by Democrats in Congress have overwhelming majority support by average Americans on every poll. And more interesting, 2 Democrat senators are the reason it did not get passed. Not Republican senators, Democrat senators. It's not about Democrat and Republican. It's about who bought who. And no one paid for you. No one paid for your interests to be heard. This is just the beginning of some of the potential landmark changes and decisions that could come from the Supreme Court. All adding to more political unrest if we let it. I'm in a number of debate groups about Roe versus Wade and abortion. I'm in a number of groups that talk about gun rights. Obviously, in the wake of another horrific school shooting. That's an argument about philosophy, about where rights come from. George Carlin made a great point that rights are made up. That's the number one problem with our documents in the United States, is that we just state that they're God-given. Well, we made that up too. We made that up too. And if you think I'm wrong, the only way we're going to figure that out is if we talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, that fundamental conflict could lead to violence. And very often it does, especially when resources become scarce. And once again, the Earth's resources have never been quite this scarce. It's getting bad. We have a big challenge. And either we're resolved to have a better conversation where we both deal with each other in good faith, are trying to cooperate, are trying to figure out what's true, are willing to pause that conversation in a non-violent way and not storm off from each other. By the way, this is how you resolve every personal conflict in your life. You're capable of doing it. And you're capable of doing it about more and more serious things. But the more we isolate and the more we only surround ourselves with people who think like we do and talk like we do, the more we ignore and are willing to keep being distracted, the more we ignore these very real issues and not think about them in a serious way, we take another step towards violence. Very real violence. Civil war is not so crazy. It's a very real possibility, and one I'd very much like to avoid. So what can we do? What should we do? Number one is understand that, most importantly, the will of the people should be represented in government. We should at least agree that if the majority of us want to do something, we should do that thing together as a group. We can keep going on in the discussion. We can keep trying to change minds. But let's do the thing most of us want to do for now and change it if the mind of the majority of us changes. But only then. None of that happens right now. None of that happens in the United States. And the reason is it takes a lot of money to run elections, and we don't have it. It's kind of like we don't have the money to represent ourselves. You need about $1 million to run for Congress. The Democrats spent $80 million trying to overthrow the Senate seat in South Carolina, only to lose brazenly. Terrible loss. $80 million they spent just on that one political race. So we have to get money out of politics, and we have to attach it to us. We have to be able to fund our own representation. I need to be able to have the money to give to the people that I want to represent me, that'll make the decisions that affect my life. It's that simple. Democracy requires representation. That's what we fought for in the United States. Remember the Tea Party? Remember that? No taxation without representation? How about no Roe v. Wade without representation? The people that got in there, into the Supreme Court, and make no mistake, those people are not impartial justices. It's bullshit. They're a political figure just like anybody else. They got there because we elected one person 4 years ago who managed to nominate and get through multiple justices during his term. A rare windfall. And because Obama didn't get to nominate one at the end of his, because the Republicans blocked him. and they just overturned one thing that will cause a massive ripple, and it will be one thing after another. And even if you're listening to me and you're on the right and you're on this side of it, you have to recognize that that's not what representative democracy is. It is not 9 unelected officials in robes making decisions that affect all of us. It should be the will of the people, the majority will of the people, that decide things like this. Things like the Build Back Better bill. Things like most of the legislation. If you and I were voting, Trump's tax cuts would have went a lot more to me than the people it went to. The average guy. But we didn't get represented. We need public funding for public elections to public offices. It's like a right to your attorney. If you can't afford one, the state will appoint one for you. If you can't afford to contribute to an election, then we should afford to help you contribute for you. And we should make it illegal for businesses and companies to donate to political campaigns. It's that simple. If you actually want democracy, which we do not have, we must have the money to fund our own representation in government. In the meantime, how would we get it would probably only have to be an amendment to the Constitution, because Congress will never do this. And the states could do that. The states could amend the Constitution to change election law and change how elections are run. And that's something the left is terrified. They think, oh my God, Trump potentially destroyed democracy on January 6th. What? What democracy? All he did was hack a broken system that was already broken. And made you all wake up and realize this shit is scary because it doesn't work. Now, the 2/3 of Republicans that think the election was fraudulent, I have bad news for them. You're dumb too. You're dumb too. Just being honest, none of that is true. Let's have an honest conversation about it. You're telling me the Democrats that can't even get their own senators to vote for their own bills stole an election? They couldn't even steal enough Senate seats to be able to do it. I don't think they're that smart. In fact, I know how stupid they are. All you need to do is watch a single Senate committee hearing that involves technology of any kind, and watch how smart our fearless leaders are. These people are not intelligent enough. They're not powerful enough, and they're not smart enough to buy elections. No, the people doing that are the oil companies and the pharmaceutical companies and the organizations. We have a massive financial takeover of our politicians. So that you and I don't get represented, they do. So they can keep their money in power. Let me repeat. The 5 largest oil companies in the first quarter of this year profited $35 billion. 1 quarter. How you doing? Probably not very good. Are we paying attention to this? Do we care enough to notice? Are we going to recognize these problems before they overtake us? Or are we going to let ourselves wait until violence is the only recourse we have? Do you want to fight? Or do you want to talk about it and have a real conversation and take action that works? Do you want to be uncomfortable and maybe admit some things that you believe could be wrong? Maybe humans don't have souls. Maybe fetuses are persons. Sometimes. Maybe they're not sometimes. What's a person? That's a hard conversation. Dare to have it. Dare to pay attention long enough. Dare to learn. Fight ignorance. And dare to learn about these things. Or you could be fighting in the next revolution. Once again, I'm going to come back to what I said at the beginning of the show. It's so easy to be lulled into this false sense of security, like these things aren't precious and require the constant defense. 4 months ago, the citizens of Kyiv never expected missiles to be crashing into their apartment buildings. Meanwhile, they had an enemy 5 feet away. They couldn't pay attention long enough to notice it was happening. They didn't have a good enough conversation to avoid that conflict. They didn't make some short-term necessary sacrifices. Like, hey, maybe Russia should annex that part of the country. Is it really that big of a deal? Maybe we can convince the Russian bullies down the road that what they're doing is really terrible. I'd rather talk about it than watch my friends and family die. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? Don't forget, many people fighting this war in Russia, for Russia, believe they're the hero. They're operating on the same hero-villain story you are operating on when you tell yourselves that the West is the good guys and Ukraine's the good guys and Russia's the villain. Maybe Putin himself is a villain. Maybe he's vastly confused. Or maybe no one listened to him. Because that's what we do when we create nations. Nations are a source of conflict. It basically says, your needs don't matter as much as mine do. We tell North Korea that every fucking day. Every fucking day, we tell North Korea, you and your people don't matter. We do. We wonder why they want nukes to be prepared to defend themselves? They watch what we do to countries that don't have nukes, and they're like, fucking don't want to be that guy. But just keep telling yourself that they're the villain and you're the hero. I hope you feel good about yourself if you're willing to tell yourself that. I'm not. I want to recognize the hard truth that we are all human. Every single person deserves meaning and security and life and access to health care and their basic needs met and a fucking hug. Every human, including Kim Jong-un, including Vladimir Putin. That's the hard truth you don't want to tell yourself, because these conversations are hard. Compromise is hard. Making sacrifices to the greater good is hard. Making sacrifices to other human beings because you want to tell yourself, well, they're a bully. They don't deserve my sacrifice. They're human too. And we all need each other. We all need each other. And there's only two paths out of conflict. So if you're ready to fight, go fight. I'm not. I'd rather talk about it. And I will never stop being rather to talk about it. I'd stop being on that side. If you can pay attention long enough, if you can stay in this mindset long enough, you don't have to resort to these warrior virtues. And you can embrace forgiveness and love and nonviolence and reason. Passive, peaceful resistance to bad ideas. Passive, peaceful resistance to people who deal with you in bad faith. Passive, peaceful resistance to bullies. It's the one thing that's ever worked. Do I need to remind you of every great civil rights movement in history? When will we actually learn the lesson? And so I'm more frustrated today after the Roe v. Wade decision with my friends on the left than I am on the right. I am. Because they are relentlessly attacking the evil right-wing monsters for daring to take away women's rights. Meanwhile, those people are patting themselves on the back saying, we're heroes, we saved the lives of so many people. All of it is a distraction. We need to talk about what we're going to agree are people and what we aren't. Are chimpanzees people? I don't know, watch a documentary on them. They seem a lot more like people than you might think. But if chimpanzees are people, so maybe are cows and other things. It's a hard philosophical question. There's an entire video on YouTube on Crash Course Philosophy about the personhood argument. And there's 6 different theories that have been proposed, and that's just in modern history. So it's not as if it's so fucking simple. We either have the courage to have these difficult conversations and treat each other in good faith and try to resolve conflicts through conversation, or violence is the only thing left. And I don't want it. And if you do, I feel bad for you. And I will passively and peacefully resist you. I would rather talk about it. And I will always choose that. I will not resort to violence. And I will not resort to styles of conversation which begin the path toward violence. And that's what you do when you call the person who disagrees with you negative emotional language like monster and evil and bad instead of just wrong. It's okay to be wrong. And it's okay to tell your friends that they're wrong. And it's okay to tell people that you love that they're wrong. And it's okay to tell your kids that they're wrong. And it's okay to tell your parents that they're wrong. They're not monsters. They're not evil. They're not villains. This is not a hero-villain story. We are all simply human beings. Capable of great terror or great transcendence, great love or great fear, great harmony or great discord. So that's the real challenge. The real challenge is, are you willing to pay attention long enough? Are you willing to stop watching that funny thing on TikTok and YouTube and distracting yourself? Or are you willing to do the work necessary to be that change you want to see in the world, embrace your Gandhian virtues that you know to be true, and actually make a difference and actually make an impact? Because right now, we need a political revolution. Not even just the scale of the 1960s, maybe the scale of the 1760s. And we need it fast, or many people will continue to suffer and die. We need a democracy that actually works, where the will of the people can actually get together and agree on who's an expert and who's not. Can agree on what's truth and what's nonsense. We need a commitment to the individual rights of every single human being on planet Earth, not just the United States. And that's a serious charge. That's a serious challenge. I'm willing to meet that challenge. I'm willing to have this conversation. And I'm going to keep having it on this show and everywhere else. Are you? Will you help? Will you tell your friends and your family and your social media that you love them enough to stop with the memes and start with the real chats? Real conversation, face to face, eye to eye, in good faith, saying that I just want the truth, and maybe I'm right, maybe you're right, but let's get to the bottom of it in fucking love. And I don't think you're evil, I just think you're wrong. Are you brave enough to do that? Can you find it in yourself? Because we need it. That's the revolution that we need. If you don't think the United States is capable of civil war, we're definitely capable of war with every country who disagrees with us. Clearly. And we have big, powerful weapons that can destroy all of humanity. Don't push us in that direction. push us in the direction of peaceful cooperation. Push our leaders to lead, to actually lead as peaceful leaders, and not constantly escalate tensions with everyone that they think is a villain. Oh, Kim Jong-un fired some missiles into the ocean, so we fired more back. Remind him who's boss. What? That's schoolyard bullshit. That's toddlers. It's time to grow up. Somebody ought to tell North Korea they love them and they deserve food, water, shelter, and peace and security like every other person on Earth. And the country that does that, that's leading from the front. That's leading with courage. That's demonstrating what it takes to resolve conflict without violence. And that's the world I want to live in, so I'm going to do everything I can to create it. And if this podcast is the only thing I do, or if it ever works or it doesn't work, I don't know, but it's worth doing. Someone's got to fucking do it. So I'm tired of the hate, and I'm tired of the violence. And I'm especially tired of it from people on the so-called left. Bastions of virtue. Paragons of virtue. No, you're a virtue signaler. Because the real virtue would be looking somebody who disagrees with you in the eye and saying, even if you hate me, I choose to love you. That's what's fucking hard. Are you brave enough to do it? Are you brave enough to stop being distracted long enough to pay attention to these things that really matter for our future and for our kids' future? Things like climate change and who are we going to count as persons? And what do we do if we have too many persons? And what do we do if we don't have enough food for the too many persons? Those are real problems. And they deserve to be solved. Aren't you tired of living in a world where a guy can fly him and his buddies to fucking space? Meanwhile, 0.1% of that money could have saved 10,000 kids in Africa by simply buying them mosquito nets for at night? That's disgraceful. I'm sorry to my friends on the left that think this abortion conversation and Roe versus Wade is so damn important. I just don't. You're having the wrong conversation. Human cooperation as opposed to violence is what's at stake here. And it doesn't come from hating people that you think are your enemies. It comes from loving other human beings enough to shut up and listen and tell them, I love you and you're wrong. Dare to do it. Dare to be different. Dare to start that revolution. Or convince yourself it won't work. I don't know why you would, considering every other major civil rights movement was all about nonviolence and peaceful resistance and all about love. Martin Luther King never asked for payback. He didn't want to punish white America. He wanted to level the scales and give everybody a fair shot. If that's the world that you want to create, if that's the world that you want to live in, then you need to give pro-life people a fair shot and a fair shake. They didn't come up with that idea on their own. Someone gave them that belief. They deserve a fair shake, and they deserve fair treatment, and they deserve a better conversation if you're brave enough to give it for them. Alex, what if they won't listen? Maybe not today. Aren't you glad the civil rights leaders of the 1960s didn't give up because they're not listening? Aren't you glad it didn't take a civil war to accomplish the Civil Rights Act? There was enough violence. There's far too much of it. We need to avoid it. We need to be better than that. And we need to challenge our leaders to do the same. And we need to actually get leaders who represent us. And not the people with the boot on their necks. And we're going to keep talking about that on this show. I really appreciate y'all joining me. For those of you watching on YouTube, this one was heavy today, and I'm fired up. But it's too damn important not to be. And I hope it fires you up. And I hope you can stay in this moment and stay in the zone and keep paying attention to what matters. Thanks for joining me.